I'm David, freshly signed for a continental level road cycling team, and I have a bit of an unusual question regarding World Tour level racing. You've come to the right spot because none of us are World Tour racers, but
we are World Tour experts.
But he says, even though we are a Conti team, we do lots of racing at a World Tour level. Therefore, it's kind of a big jump for me coming from amateur racing. No doubt, David, way to go on jumping into the deep end, so to speak. That's pretty cool and admirable. He says, I realized that all the World Tour races recently did Vuelta a Asturias and GP Miguel Indurain. Those are big races that like big race. I watched those, and this is cool.
You could watch those on TV.
Yeah. Way to go, David. And he says, I noticed that these races are raced in a really different manner than amateur ones. In amateur racing, you would highly rely on your peak power outputs of 1, 5, 20 minutes, etc. However, at the World Tour, I don't get even close to hitting those or VO2 or anaerobic power, but I always get dropped at the end after about 3,500 kilojoules into a race because I could not keep up with something like 380 watts, even though my FTP is about 420 watts. He says there's a lot of climbing in which we in the peloton do at a traveling pace, which I like that traveling pace he uses in quotes, between 330 and 380 watts. So just traveling pace. He says, whenever I get dropped, it's because I can't use my power, not because I don't have the power. I got so fatigued toward the end that the percentage of my FTP that I could use was really low. Let's say 10 minutes into a 370 watt climb, I get dropped, whereas during training, I could do that really easily. My training plan since December has been a lot of specified efforts at Z4 and Z5, 5 to 10, 20-minute efforts. However, I don't actually use my PR efforts and FTP during these World Tour races because it's much rather just a constant effort, and whoever has the stamina to survive at the end makes a move and wins. So they say you have a box of matches to burn throughout the race. But in World Tour racing, I feel like I'm constantly burning a torch, and the size of my torch depends on where I finish and get dropped. He mentions that he weighs 72 kilograms and has an FTP of 420 watts. That is quite the power to weight ratio. And he says, from December on, I was focusing on increasing my FTP. However, now I feel like I should be able to use this power in a race rather than having it higher and higher. So what do you recommend? Should I include more longer base riding with tempo efforts? Should I just increase the volume of my training, sub-threshold efforts? Any help's appreciated. Love the podcast. Help me both physically and mentally. From David Kovacs. So, and I mentioned we usually don't mention people's last names, but I mentioned it in this case, so we can all go find David wherever he is on Instagram and in pro races and cheer him on because it's super cool. So a lot of thoughts on this one. Nate, do you want to just share your initial thoughts? I thought that this is none of us telling you, hey, World Tour racer, this is exactly what to do. This is just us kind of sharing our thoughts here. So
I feel very unqualified to give David advice on this, but I will. So David, I'm going to pretend you're just a normal racer. If just looking at what I'd like to see power profiles and stuff, but just looking at what you're saying, the two things that I would work on, especially now you have that high peak power, is one, like nutrition during the race, especially after 3,500 kilojoules and you not being able to do those efforts. There's, it might be 1 to 1.8 ratio between glucose to fructose, and you might be able to do over 100. And with your watts, I would experiment with like 130, even up to 150. That might help the whole time. And the other one is extremely long sweet spot efforts. I'd be throwing that into like 90% for a very, very long time, so that muscular endurance side of it is very easy for you, because that sounds like the type of racing you're doing is you're hitting at that traveling pace for a very, very long time and then having to hit. So I would get really good at doing those repeats for a long time. And I'd be curious of where you're at right now relative to your threshold, kind of like your sweet spot level. How good are you at expressing a little bit lower percentage of your threshold for a very long time? And I would try to work on raising that up, because I bet you're not going to you're at 5.8 watts per kilo. There's probably very little chance that you can get, that much higher watt per kg. And the other one is that you're probably already doing at World Tour level is very long rides too. That's a different way to fatigue those fibers. It's going to be different than sweet spot, but I would also throw those in at the very long rides. So maybe even then after that 3,500 kilojoules, start doing it depends on your whole week and how you stack it and stuff, but start doing some of those intervals that you do in the races at the end after those 3,500 kilojoule rides, and then play with your nutrition during that time. So if you are try it at 100 grams per hour, try it at 150 on a long ride like that, and then try to do those efforts and see how those feel. Of course, that'll be a little bit easier because you're not doing, if you're going zone two for that long, you're not doing those real high sustained sweet spot. But you could also throw that inside of a sweet spot, play with the nutrition, because you're going to absorb at a different rate too at the sweet spot. So if you're working at sweet spot, the amount of carbs you ingest might be less than if you're at Z2 the whole time. So play with it in there too, and then try to pretty much try to simulate that race scenario for your nutrition to see what would happen. So I guess it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't know. This is David. I have no experience. This race sounds incredibly, incredibly hard. Getting dropped at 5.8 watts per kilo, just sitting at 380 for a while. It's easy, easy travel pace.
This is a totally different ball of wax from what most of us ever face that are listening to this podcast, right? Like we just won't have races this long, this hard, this consistently hard. And that's like a totally, so hence, there's a lot of things that kind of stand out. Nate, you mentioned that like he might be like a sweet spot level 6, when if he was a sweet spot level 8, that might make him an absolute force to be reckoned with, right? In this sort of scenario.
Yeah. And sweet spot level 10 on our system too is more of a, you can start working on threshold, because most people aren't peaked at their closer to the genetic potential. But this is one where you might want to make a sweet spot effort that's a level 15, or you're doing this outside where you're holding that 90%, like a pro triathlete almost, like for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And it is very possible to hold that for a lot longer than, than you would think.
Yep, sure. What do you think, Ivy?
I think that a way that our athletes can relate to this, and like a big overarching theme that I'm seeing from David, is that they're trying to compare training effort to race effort. And like, while the cognitive aspect of racing versus training, like David is probably super familiar with, like the things that you have to pay attention and think about in a race, like looking at your cue sheet, where's the next KOM? When is a good time to go back to the car? Where are my teammates? Do they need help? Like, do I need to move them around? Like, all that stuff is really taxing and like results in a physical taxing result. And so that's why, like,
holy crap, there's Alejandro Valverde like right next to me, and there's like like that on top of it too, right?
Yeah. And so I mean, like, our athletes can learn from this too, like why you can't always compare a race effort, or like from a numbers perspective, to a training effort, because when you're training and everything's controlled and like you're on the roads that you ride on and you don't have to think about all these things, like there's less of a physical tax on you than when you're in a race and have all those other things. Like, it doesn't, you wouldn't think that that kind of mentally taxing stuff ends up to be physically taxing, but it is. And my assumption is just that, like, as David gets more familiar with these races and those things become like less stressful to him, and he gets more comfortable like moving around and going back to the car and all that stuff, like it will become less demanding.
Pete, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the first things I thought of is, those ultra efficient people that move around in the pack, and it just feels like they're floating and they're always moving the correct direction at the correct time, and they're never pedaling too hard and all that. I would imagine that David could find some people in the races that he is doing that are probably the people winning the races or making the late race moves, that are just so much more efficient at the beginning and at the middle. And again, it's like taking into account your skill set. So if David is super good at cornering or descents, he can really ease off on the last 2 minutes of every climb and very easily catch the field again. And so maybe it's only small numbers again. Like we're talking, if you start fading, you drop 20 watts off and you're only doing 360, that might be the difference at the end, where you're actually running out of the KJs because you've actually used less overall. So it's one where everybody can get better all the time, but finding someone, I think it's twofold. David should figure out what he's really good at and start picking out places that he can work less hard and acting on those during a race, but then also find someone or find multiple people that he could hang out with in the pack that just make smart decisions all the time. And you'll just learn from that by staying near them or staying around them and seeing what they're doing, because a lot of the time you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't realize that they're always taking the inside, or they're always sheltered, they're never on the sides of the road, it's a big difference. And that's at their level, there's such a small difference between the high level athletes that's the stuff that matters. So pay attention to positioning and what you could do learning from other people and what you're really good at and how you can kind of twist it to your advantage.
David is probably very good at this, but this happens in general with people and where they are very fit for their category. So 5.8 watts per kilo at 420 at 72, even in Conti amateur racing, or like that is very fit. And David might not have had to develop some of these like very fine nuanced skills that Pete's talking about, where if he was 5.4 watts per kilo at Conti or 5, he'd have to develop these or else he'd just get dropped. And I'm saying David might have all these skills, but in general, for all of us listening, this totally happens, right? Where because of my fitness level in a mountain bike race, I've placed way higher and my skills are not there. Same thing in crits too, where you can, if you race in a lower version or a lower level of a crit, you don't have to be that good. But when you start racing at the higher level, man, you got to learn really fast. If you don't, you're going to just get kicked out later. And that's kind of cool to be able to race with faster people and just hold on and hang in. I remember the first time I raced a race in Reno, my whole goal was just to like, hold on. It's like 2009 or something. And that was, it was very, very hard. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I got dropped, but yeah, it's cool to do that sometimes and just have that goal of being extremely efficient.
Yeah. You know, David, in this case too, what I see is something that I've seen in myself where I look at my training numbers and I look at my racing numbers and they become their own unique source of frustration because I'm like, why can't I do it? And it gets frustrating and I start to question everything and it actually ends up just making everything worse. So there's your training and your numbers, and that's good. And that should encourage you. And then you should look at your racing and say, in time, as I refine and refine my execution, and then as I get more used to it, as maybe I build up my aerobic capabilities so I can ride at a higher percentage of that threshold for more time instead of just having the high threshold, as you improve, you'll get to the point where you'll start to see those numbers and even PRs above those numbers from races. But this is probably pretty representative of a lot of people where you train, you get faster, especially when a pandemic happens and you've just been training and you have all this crazy fitness that you've built. And now you're going to have these races and it's hard to execute. And you have to learn, there's a lot of nuance in allowing yourself to express all the ability you've made. That's one of the things that I always try to think about is in a race, I'm just trying to make the decisions that allow me to express the fitness I have. It's there, but I need to be able to make the right decisions to allow me to express it. So this is something that in your case, if that is becoming a unique source of frustration, don't worry about it. Take confidence in the fact that you have the numbers in your training. You didn't cheat your way there. You're like, those numbers are real. You did that hard work. So those will help you with time. Those will come out. So
this is a crazy one. So this is the Science of Getting Faster podcast with the ketone esters. This is dangerous, but what based on that, and I think some World Tour people have done this, you could take ketone esters at the very beginning of the race. What it does is it's harder for you to do the really hard efforts, but on these lower sweet spot efforts, you'll save some glycogen. By the time the end of the race wears off or is there, the ketone esters have worn off and you can actually, you have glycogen in reserve. That's what they showed in that study, but that's, again, because if it goes really hard early on, exactly, you're like, see you later, I'm gone. You got to really know the course and make sure that that doesn't happen, crosswinds and all that sort of thing. That would be probably not recommended by anyone. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Risky move to take for sure.
Risky move.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.